Because I've seen in practice so many people that just get way worse injuries from being bit, scratched, or whatever by their own dog trying to help them than the actual injuries that the dog sustained. They start pawing their muzzle or rubbing their face on the ground, and then they're going to start breaking off the visible white part of the quill shaft, and then you're left with that sort of really pokey, small black thing that could do who knows what. You know, unless there's one that's like a chronic problem, we're not going to go cutting a little hole and trying to pull it out in those situations. And when a dog gets in, they got like 500 or 600 in their face. I mean, you're not going to find every single one.
It's like I told him, I'm like, hey man, you got the drot, right? That was step one in your adventure to the Porcupine. Everybody, welcome back to another episode of GDIY presented by Standing Stone Supply. My guest this time is Seth Bynum. Seth, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're going to kind of explore a topic that every upland hunter, you know, that they're familiar with to some degree. They hope they never cross paths with it while out there with their dog, and that's porcupines. But first, I want to kind of pick your brain on something that's kind of a little bit more timely right now going around the country, is this kind of respiratory disease. I want to get your take on that. But first, let's start off. Go ahead and introduce yourself for the listeners that may not be aware of who you are and what you do. Introduce yourself, and then we can kind of jump on into this whole respiratory disease thing going around.
Sure, you probably want to hear my credentials before I start talking about infectious disease.
Right, yeah, let's round it out first.
Yeah, so I mean, when I'm not in the field hunting, my day job is a veterinarian, and so that's how I support the family, and it's one of those things where I get the opportunity to blend together my two passions, that for being in the field, upland hunting with my dogs, and also being in medicine as well. So that's mostly how I spend my time. And I live in Idaho. I have actually grew up in North Carolina. I have lived out west for more than 20 years now in western states like Montana and Washington, now kind of easing back to the east a little bit in the panhandle of Idaho, which is a great upland state. Yeah,
I got my first taste of Idaho earlier this year, and I know I'll be back at some point. That was a cool trip. You definitely have some special terrain out there, and I'm excited to check back there. What do you primarily do out there? There's a lot of opportunity and different species to chase. What do you prefer to chase, and what kind of dogs are you chasing them with?
Well, I'm German short hairs. I'm down to 2 now. I lost our older dog in October. He was 14 and was in his 15th hunting season, hunting pretty strong until cancer caught up with him. But so I'm definitely a short hair addict, and I can't see myself having anything else except for maybe a pointer, something with less hair and not more, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. So you like the short hair dogs?
Yeah, for sure. And I've been enamored with pointing breeds for a long time. And just from the first time I laid eyes on a short hair, the striking roan and ticking is just really appeals to me aesthetically. And then their versatility was another big attraction early on. But you asked me about species, and Idaho is kind of fortunate that you can sort of dive into whatever interests you. I tend to follow the seasons more so than just going after the birds I want to go after first. I hate rattlesnakes, so I tend to avoid anything like that's going to be in snake country until they're well put up for the year. So there's some pretty decent rough grouse. There's some declining but still passable pheasant hunting in spots and things like that. So you can get into a variety of upland species over the course of the year. And then as this time of year turns around, although I was hunting chukars yesterday in a t-shirt, it was 50, no snakes, of course, but it was, I try to go after those kind of birds later in the year.
How'd you do yesterday on your hunt?
I did really well. So it's the backstory is, and I want your listeners to hear this, is that
you don't have to go down it if you don't want to.
I didn't blow you off, but I get a text from you we had scheduled this for yesterday after I'd already rescheduled it once. And then it was pouring rain, and looked out the window, and there was like a little bit of a sucker hole opening up. And my wife was like, my mom's getting the kids today from school. And I was like green light all the way. So I just like jumped in the car. I even grabbed the wrong shotgun. I'm glad I grabbed one at all, and just like beat it for the hills. And then you texted me like, "Hey, you want to start this thing now?" And I'm like, "Oh man, I knew there was something I was forgetting, and it was your podcast, so we rescheduled for today. But yeah, we did great. The weather was fantastic. Like I said, it was warm, so the dogs were definitely hounding me for water pretty early on, and I didn't
Hmm.
pack quite enough for that type of demand, if you know what I mean. So I kind of
Yeah.
strategize. Usually, if it had been that hot, in October or September, I'd have twice that much or more. But it was more like the Hun show, really. We just kept running into coveys of Huns, and I've never, in my memory, never shot a limit of them. They're always just something that I'll grab, one, two, three of them, something like that, as we're hunting chuckers, or if we're hunting pheasants, they could be in the same type of habitat. But for whatever reason, they were there and abundant, and we did well on them.
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, this isn't just specific to Idaho, so people don't go marking your map saying I'm going to Idaho for Huns next year, but it seemed like or the Huns just exploded everywhere this year. No matter where you wanted to go, the Dakotas, Montana, Canada, like I mean, it was like the year of Huns. From my experience, obviously going into Idaho, I got into quite a bit of them, but then just talking to everybody, it was just a really good year for Huns. And anybody that hasn't chased Huns, they're climbing up my ladder of upland species that I really enjoy hunting. They're just some cool birds.
Yeah, they're cool to eat too as well. I love the red meat
Yeah,
that they have. And they're generally kind of known for running and kind of messing with the dogs a little bit. In this case, they were holding really tight. A couple times I would scoot ahead of the dog on point, and the birds would be between the two of us, kind of thinking they're going to be
mm,
down the slope and another 20, 30 yards out, maybe running already. But no, in this
yeah.
case, they were really holding tight. It's a lot of fun.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that the logistical mishap resulted in a good outing for you at the very least. But I'm glad we were able to circle back and link up on this. And as we kind of talk about this respiratory thing,
Sure.
I tried researching a little bit on it, but I hate honestly researching things that are really timely in the news like
Yeah.
this right now, because you read one thing, you think that you're starting to wrap your head around what's going on or what it might be, or kind of where we stand with the status of it. And then you read the next article and it completely just goes the exact opposite way. And so after reading a handful of articles and then lists of states on where it's been confirmed and then what that means, I finally was just like, all right, I'm just going to wait until I talk to Seth, because obviously, you have probably a little bit better knowledge of which resources to look at when we're
Yeah.
dealing with something like this. So why don't you go ahead, and instead of me trying to regurgitate what I've kind of dug up and researched on my end and asking you questions, why don't you just kind of kick it off, tell everybody what's going on, and whether we really should be concerned, at least to the level that a lot of people are right now.
Sure. I mean, I think it's worth pointing out that there's always been sort of a cadre of respiratory diseases in dogs. Most of them are bacterial in origin. Some of them are viral. It's kind of that's sort of how we treat them based on that etiology. But and I also want your readers to know that I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not an infectious disease expert. I'm just kind of like a boots on the ground guy dealing with this stuff in the clinic as you bring your patients in, or you call me about your dog and want advice. The reason why you've had a hard time finding things on it is that we really don't know a whole lot, and I don't necessarily want that to be cause for alarm in your listeners. I feel like we'll probably get to the bottom of what's going on. I do think the media, just for example, like in the clinic where I have my home base now, I don't believe we've seen anything that's been definitively a case of this. Okay, there's been some maybe in southern Idaho and here and there, and I'm not saying it's not a problem for those people that have experienced it, but I think in terms of it being like an epidemic or a pandemic, I feel like we're not to that point yet. But I do think the media kind of likes to make, I mean, that's just good news to have something kind of that
Yeah.
strikes a little fear in folks and they want to know more about it. Um, what we do know is that there is some sort of unknown at this point pathogen that's out there causing mild to moderate and in some cases severe respiratory disease that can be just limited to the upper respiratory system, so like nose and throat in that area, or get farther down and maybe contribute to some more serious conditions like a pneumonia. And I think why it's been a little startling to clinicians like myself and to some of our clients is that they have not this disease has not really responded to the typical, battery of treatment that we kind of throw at these sort of things. Um, I think it's preferentially targeting sort of the young and the old, or the immune compromised, a lot in the way that COVID seemed to do the same.
Hmm.
But I don't want to make a comparison to COVID-19, but just sort of as a way that this seems to sort of affect people. But we don't really know. And at this point, I don't think. I mean, I think veterinarians are a little concerned and more like eyebrow raising. I don't think we're like throwing up the flag that everybody needs to panic about this.
Yeah.
So that's the part I wanted to make clear, if nothing else.
Is there any kind of general advice you can give somebody? I say somebody's listening to this and they are concerned. It's just like we all lived it with COVID through our own stuff, and everybody, to varying degrees, they cared or didn't care. And
Yeah.
I'm not opening that can of worms here. But when it comes to how much somebody's concerned about it with their dog, is there kind of some general advice? Like, is it safe to go do your normal activities, maybe just stay away from other dogs, or you probably have the mind to where it's just like, hey, if your dog's vaccinated and you've done everything on your end, continue doing what you're doing. It's really not reason for concern as of right now.
I think it depends on what your daily activities are. I mean, if you're in sort of a high density kind of like environment with a bunch of dogs, I think you should probably, you know, exercise some caution, just step it up a little bit, more hand washing. Maybe if that in your job involves that, you probably already had this discussion, but you're going to want to, like maybe leave your clothes at the door or straight into the wash before you come into the home and maybe expose your own pets. It does seem like there's a component of this that's contagious that you can sort of like transmit from your own clothing from another environment to your own pets, but it's a little unclear at this point. So yeah, I mean, I probably would avoid a dog park, but that's been my MO for a long time.
Right.
Yeah, if you can avoid boarding your pet right now, that would be great. It's not like it's a guarantee that's going to happen, but anytime you get a bunch of dogs in the same space and they're vocalizing and they're breathing and they're a little stressed from being away from their normal environment, that's just sort of a good conditions to brew something up.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, when I was kind of bouncing around article to article and resource to resources, that there really wasn't anything that really should be highlighted. But when I we do fall in this kind of situation where all the resources are all kind of saying something different, it's like, well, let's look at what they do agree on, and it seemed like all of them kind of mirrors reflects what you just said. But then when they start talking about at least the vets, kind of where you guys are leaning towards on what may be causing a lot of this is a lot of people got lax on their pet vaccinations during COVID. Maybe they weren't going out, maybe they weren't doing the daycare as much, and so they're thinking that maybe this is something that's been around before. It's nothing new. It's just that we have a lot more dogs unvaccinated, and I don't know. I know we've kind of come across that in people before, where people kind of get lax on certain diseases, vaccinations throughout the years. Maybe they think something's just completely long gone, and then next thing you know, people stop getting vaccinated for polio or smallpox, and then guess what starts popping back up in random places.
Sure, yeah, and I guess it's sort of safe to draw that parallel. I don't think we know for sure if sort of this. I mean, I think your point about us being isolated and not having these dogs commune together because we were isolating ourselves as humans may have set up a situation in which we lost our herd. The dogs lost their herd immunity towards these things that they're just sort of kicking around to each other.
Yeah.
As far as I know, there's really nothing. Well, again, I think there's a lot of unknowns in this situation. Having the vaccines lapse is bad for other reasons.
Right.
Parvo being the not the least among them is one I would be concerned about. But and certainly rabies if you're in the east of the Mississippi or south. Um, so yeah, I don't know if there's a vaccine shortage in that regard, or at least a vaccine coverage shortage. But I'd say that's something maybe too, the fact that we've been apart for a while.
Yeah. Is there a resource that you would recommend for if somebody does care to kind of keep an eye to where if they want to go to this resource that maybe you would recommend, it's kind of a general safe to where if they come out suggesting something, you can probably kind of trust it rather than maybe having to just Google it and then just, I don't know, read 20 different resources and decide which one. Is there one that you would direct people to going straight towards?
Yeah, it kind of depends on your state. I mean, there's lots of great Department of Health websites, and a lot of veterinary branches are under the Department of Health in states. You can look at the Department of Agriculture, those are things. I think you're going to get reliable information. And I think the state's boards of veterinary medicine are going to have sort of like a consensus statement that they're going to release from here's what we know, and this is coming from our group of veterinarians that practice here. So those
Yeah.
are pretty reliable sources. They're not going to put out something that's not going to be backed by some whatever research we have available or whatever data. It's not going to be sensationalized.
Gotcha. Well, it's something challenging trying to make sense out of the unknown. It sounds like it's going to be at least a little bit longer before somebody makes some sense out of this. But it's looking at the state list. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's popping up, but it doesn't seem to be. At least, I've had a few listeners reach out asking about, if I've heard anything different or if I could interview somebody on it. And, just looking into it, it doesn't seem like it's that vast spreading thing. It seems like there's pockets of it. So just
Hotspots.
kind of look into it. And if there's reason for concern, like you said, that's kind of left up to each owner and their prerogative and how they want to react. So,
Mhm.
moving on to the main topic that we're going to get into. This is something that this is not anything brand new or unknown to us upland
Oldest time.
hunters. Oldest time. It's a challenge that you do this long enough, you're at least going to come across the opportunity for it to mess up a day eventually for you or your dog, and more than likely both. But porcupines. It's this year, every year you hear from a lot of people saying, their dog got into a porcupine, and we can sit here and have some fun with it on which breeds we primarily hear that from, or whatever. There's certain types of breeds that are more prone to coming across the occasional porcupine than others. But this year, I don't know if this is something that you're seeing on your end or people are bringing them in, but it just seems like porcupines are even more prevalent this year. I don't know if people are just putting it on social media or texting or calling or people just closer to me. At least on my end, it seems like a lot more people are running across them than in the normal hunting season. What anecdotally, like, are you seeing a little bit more porcupine incidents on your end this year, or is it just, par for the course as always?
I don't know about number of incidents. I feel like you probably want to ask a biologist if there's a way you could get a bumper crop of new porkies based on conditions. But maybe the same moisture that helped those Huns kind of explode this year in the spring, put on the right kind of bark or other sort of nutrients they need to like have a successful growth in their population. It's hard to say in terms of interactions with them. I think it's probably a lot more just in terms of people have access to share those encounters more than they ever did. And then I think that there's more people getting into the sport, more people, getting out there and hunting. They're hunting more days, per year than they used to and things like that. So maybe just more opportunity there. I guess in my
Yeah.
own personal experience, I guess this year I have seen more, but, but I don't really, it hasn't been like all of a sudden we have a bunch of bad experiences with them.
Right.
But I'm
Have
not sure there's
you
any data behind that.
right? Have you personally had a run-in with your dogs on porcupines? Have you had an incident that you've had to handle in the field?
Yeah, of my own twice. Both were really mild. I try to porcupine break my dogs whenever I get an opportunity. Usually, I'll start training pretty heavily in early August, and when the weather cooperates, of course, and then we'll run into them, and they'll usually be about 3 or 4 feet off the ground in a tree, so they're not like an imminent threat, or at least I get a sense that they're there first. The dogs usually point them, and that's an opportunity where I'm not just going to go lighten the dog up with the collar, but more or less just create a situation in which the dog knows that I don't care, it's not important to me, and they shouldn't have anything to do with that. Um, that's typically how I do it in the background. That said, I had my older dog probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. put his nose on one. It kind of was in like this perfect spot where like a hand would like hold real tight in some reed canary grass, and came out with a nose full, and that's it. Of course,
Hmm.
I'm glad it was not more than that because he was out of his mind, crazy about it. Just like completely inconsolable. And then I had actually my 8-year-old female this year. She went in and just got her a little sniff to see what it was, or maybe just and just right again right on the just right on the tip of
Snout.
the muzzle there, and that's it. So those were ones that didn't require very much work. I mean, that was some needle nose pliers and a little bit of what we call brutocane. So just like a little strength and holding them down. That's all they required. But
Gotcha.
I was with some folks that this week twice, not this week, this season, that their dogs went after him pretty good. One of them was on the cusp of needing sedation, but it was not to remove ones from inside the mouth. But the guy that owned the dog chose not to do that. And then there was another one that was a 2-person job, and so
Yep.
that dog probably would have wished it got sedated. It's
See,
pretty stressed out by the end of it.
and porcupines, it's an interesting topic because, like you said, it can range from just a couple in the nose, no big deal, and some dogs get the message on just an incident like that, just like a little quick, just running, brushing. I personally, knock on wood, I haven't had any incidents with my own dogs. I actually haven't even seen one while out hunting. Or at least that I've noticed. We may have passed them by, who knows? But
Mhm.
I have been in the field to where some friends in the group, their dogs got into them, and both of them were pretty gnarly incidents,
Mhm.
and it can go from just the two in the snout that you described to, man, my buddy's Drott Jacob, we told the story a few weeks ago on the podcast. He made it count. Like, this was not just a couple in the nose, pull them out, go on your way.
Yeah.
This was a 2-man job for an hour and a half to just clear their airway, and then it was get them to a vet so we can sedate them and do this
Yeah.
right. And so, when you're talking about incidents such as this, people, you don't know what you don't know. So if you've never been around an actual serious porcupine incident, you might be one to be like, it's no big deal. Just carry some pliers with you and yank them out, right? But when you kind of get into the situation and you start seeing how some of these like they're hollow quills, there's barbs on them, it can go sideways on you pretty quick, especially when you start getting into them. And if you're going too quick, you're snapping them off at the skin and all kinds of stuff. Uh, in your professional opinion, what should be somebody's primary concern right off the bat if your dog comes up to you carrying a porcupine like we were faced a couple months ago in Wisconsin? What there's a bunch of different ways we can go about this, but like, to you, what's your first primary care? Like, what are you trying to figure out right then and there?
Well, I think before I do anything with my medical mind, it's like self-preservation, and that should be everybody's. That should be your own priority too, because I've seen and practiced so many people that just get way worse injuries from being bit, scratched, or whatever by their own dog trying to help them, than the actual injuries that the dog sustained too. So I think first of all, just make sure you have like a strategy for how you're going to protect yourself, because you're going to do something that's uncomfortable, or even far more than that in some situations. And like even the most mild mannered dog, if pushed to a certain level, they're gonna try to like instinctively protect themselves. So that's my first thought in my mind. Beyond that, I feel like you kind of need to have a sort of a baseline for what can I do, what's beyond my level of expertise, and when do I need to get a veterinarian involved. And I think no matter which way you go in that regard, just do something quickly, because when those things are they're obviously it's pierced the skin, right? It's covered in it's covered in porcupine bacteria. There's little barbs. If you look at it under a microscope, it's got all these backward facing barbs like a Christmas tree kind of thing that keep it from that basically advances one direction and hard to pull out. The longer they're in there, the more inflammation occurs from that insult in the skin, and it starts to swell around there, and it's essentially just like locking it in place or helping it migrate further in. So the longer you wait, the worse off that you are. So I think that the decision on whether you take action yourself or not depends on a lot about your dog and your dog's temperament, depends on how many quills are there. It depends on your comfort level with any of that stuff. Maybe you want a vet to do everything. You don't want to, or maybe you have a dog that it's just you don't have that kind of real. No, that people don't usually recognize this when this is an actual problem. But if your dog's going to bite you, and you can't, or it's like 80-pound draught that can take you in a wrestling match, then that's probably not something you're going to want to tackle yourself without any equipment or support in the field. So that's when you just walk them out and make a vet do it. And
Yeah,
really, all the vet's really good for, I think, at that stage is just we just are the gatekeepers to the drugs that make them stop moving, so that you can just open them up and pull them for wherever they're
exactly.
at, and the
Yeah,
experience to know where. And I don't want to, speak poorly of vets, but we have the experience to kind of know some of the sneaky places they want to hang out, and those are the ones that cause you big problems down the road.
yeah.
The migrating ones, the ones in the back of the throat, the ones that are in the in the eye, right in the cornea, like a little tip or something like that. Yeah.
And that's that you went right where I was kind of going with this is a dog comes up to you quilled and they're freaking they got hit all over the face. It's like, yeah, okay, well, I see the quills, but I didn't know if there were certain areas that we should really highlight in that process to where, like, okay, first and foremost, let's check the airway, then the eyes, and then, if it's that bad, get to the vet after that. But, is there kind of a checklist and priority to where, maybe just getting hit by a porcupine turns into a greater issue or a bigger issue in the field, that you can possibly prevent if you get to it immediately in certain locations on the dog, if that's fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it. So, like, I want to know about those ones that are sort of in the back of the throat, and they can start on the tongue, or if the dog is given a long period of time to, like, freak out about it, they start pawing their muzzle or rubbing their face on the ground, and then they're going to start breaking off the visible white part of the quill shaft, and then you're left with that sort of really pokey small black thing that could do who knows what.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, my rule of thumb is, like, if you're in the field and you got a bunch in the back of the throat, like, plan on taking that dog in. If you've got some in or around the eye, plan on taking that dog in to have somebody just do a real thorough, um, examination. Like, and you can probably participate in most of those rural vets you're going to find when you do these things. They'll have you back there looking at all the under the tongue and that kind of stuff too. But once they're out and properly sedated, so that you can see better.
Yeah. And so really the black tip, that's the tip that we're concerned about causing the quill to migrate into the dog. So if you're, because when the dog gets a hold of the porcupine, the quills are kind of arranged a million different ways. It's not
Yeah,
like it's not an even row to where they're all kind of hanging out the same way.
yeah.
They're all just kind of Gatling gunned into the dog. And so you have some to where the black tip's facing out, the white tip's facing out on others, and all kinds of stuff. And that's something that the most previous uh, experience with the dog in the field that got tagged, when we went into the vet, she was kind of explaining that to us too, to where the ones with the black tips in him, that's the one that she was really concerned about more so than the white tips. And she was trying to say that if the black tip is facing out, you can yank those out a heck of a lot easier because of the barbs, but then also the white part is a little bit more fragile or hollow, like there's more give to it, so you can snap it off easier.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's kind of like, I'm trying to think of a quick analogy without putting much thought into it, but like a Nerf dart. That's sort of what they're like. So,
Yeah,
like, the hard tip of it is, like, that's where all the business is, and then the white part is just the vehicle that carries it around. And I mean, it's designed to break off super easy, because the porcupine, I mean, evolutionarily wants to get hit by the predator, and just these things just fall off of it, but then they stay inside whatever bit it,
yeah,
or touched it, or whatever. But they don't really have anything sharp on the white part per se. They all look a little different depending on where on the porcupine the quill came from, because it's a molted kind of look, like that grouse you have back there. Um, but it's and they don't all typically migrate, but those are the ones that are going to cause you some trouble. Like, you get a tip that's broken off and it's buried under the skin. Most likely it's going to sit there and just fester and create like a little miniature abscess, to where there'll be like a pimple or swelling, and pus will come out, and then maybe the quill will come with it, and that'll be the end of it. Or it might just get really creative and find a a plane between some tissue and just start to kind of work itself somewhere that could cause you, like I'm talking about like the chest cavity or
Mhm.
deeper under the skin, and just create this like kind of long-term nuisance or potentially dangerous situation.
Yeah. I think when you talk to the average person about a quill or anything kind of getting into a dog's skin, be it a stick or whatever, a grass seed or on, you talk about it migrating. They, for some reason in their head, they picture that it can only migrate so far, like it can only just
Hmm.
go a short distance. I don't think that they've really seen or read or kind of worst case scenarios just how far some of these things can migrate. I've read some incidents where these are obviously worst case scenarios to where it's just like it'll end up on the complete opposite side of the dog.
Hmm.
Talk to me about that to where, when we talk about these migrating, I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, that is the primary concern about leaving any of these quills in there to where we're hoping that they just fester out. But if it does migrate, that's something that, it can end up anywhere on the dog.
Yeah, and again, that's not the norm, so I don't want to scare people into that situation. I would say that there's probably far worse problems with grass-ons doing that than porcupine quills.
Mm,
As the vast majority. And then even when you get a dog like what you described that's just gone to town and a bunch are broken because they tried to remove some in the field and weren't successful, we just have to leave those in there. It's not like we're gonna, unless there's one that's like a chronic problem, we're not gonna go cutting a little hole and trying to pull it out in those situations. So we have to be comfortable with some of them being in there. And when a dog gets in, they got like 500 or 600 in their face. I mean, you're not going to find every single one because you got a dog with like a black nose or a black muzzle, and you got a little tiny black, pinhead sort of thing in there. You're
yeah.
not you're not going to see them all. So that I don't want people to be concerned about that. But every once in a while, they can do some crazy things, and there's room in there for those things to move because you've got the barb, and every time the tissue moves, it just sort of like kind of crawls like a worm, so like inchworm, can sort of do that sort of thing, and only in one direction. And if you picture like if you've skinned a deer, right? You've got once you get the hide off, there's like that whole layer between the hide comes off pretty easy because there's like this gap, like a fascial layer that things are all sort of connected. There's like one big layer on the dog and on a deer as well. Of course, the things can just sort of slide around in there fairly easily.
Yeah.
Where you get a problem is if it sort of turns and then that can be that would cause more or less like an abscess or something that would boil out or have to be kind of opened up and drained. But sometimes they'll turn and sort of pierce through the rib cage, like into the chest cavity, and then you've taken bacteria that was on the dog's skin and on the porcupine, and then you've pushed it into that sort of sterile environment. Then you've got a serious problem.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a life-threatening deal there.
And you've brought up the bacteria from the porcupine a couple times on this, and so I kind of had this written down to bring up at some point, but I want to get your take on this because this can be the kind of the danger if you wait and try and research something at the tailgate after something happens. If you just Google, porcupine quills on dogs. I did that in researching and getting ready for this discussion. There were numerous sources that talked about how we don't need to worry about infection from this because the porcupine quills naturally have some form of antibiotic on the quills in case the porcupines actually quilled themselves by accident so that they don't actually get infected from their own quills. If somebody Googles that and they read that, they're like, oh, we have all the time in the world. We don't have to worry about, keeping it clean. Clearly, you've had this incident to where that these dogs can get infected by these porcupine quills. But I just find it interesting that it wasn't just one source. It was, numerous sources on, that you go click on it and you read about it, and it's just like, oh yeah, antibiotic, antibiotic, antibiotic. And so a lot of people, if they don't know any better,
Yeah.
might assume that they're in the clear.
I'm going to go Google this as soon as we're done here because I'm really intrigued by this phenomenon. I mean, it's
Yeah.
hair. It's hair or fur. So there's even if the porcupine, if this is even remotely true, which I'm thinking how you could take this and spin it and make it sound that way, but that would be too far in the weeds to go with your listeners. But it's a common encounter with just normal like environmental bacteria. Anytime you
Yeah.
put something that lives outside and you stick it
Inside.
inside, it's like in a
Yep.
not it's an anaerobic environment. There's no air. That's the stuff that it will go to town in there because it's like, oh, thank goodness, I finally reached a place where I can replicate without anything bothering me. So
Right.
that's good. They could brush up against a tree, they could get in the dirt, and
Yeah.
that may not be their own sort of like natural flora of their skin that gets in there, or it could be, or it's probably just something from some spore from the ground, or who knows?
Something.
But it ain't supposed
Yeah.
to be inside the dog, and, and their
Well,
immune
well,
system will tell you that.
well,
Yeah.
when we wrap this up and you go research that, you let me know your response, and I'll include that
Okay.
in the outro of this
Yeah.
episode, because I was reading that and I'm like, all right, that's really interesting. I even wrote it down, and it's just like, all right, I was gonna get your take on that, and so when you brought it up, I'm like, all right, I gotta ask now. But while we're on this topic of researching and figuring out what's true and what's not true, there just like everything in this space, there's a bunch of people that can claim that you know. Porcupine shoot quills. That's probably the most common one, that
Mm.
most common myth that people hear constantly. What are some of the other myths that you're aware of in this instance, to where people just need to realize that porcupines don't shoot quills? We know that. It's just dogs actually have to come into contact with them. Are there any other myths or concerns that we should really just kind of stop repeating and putting it out there for everybody?
Well, I've never been able to understand. Well, this is not necessarily a myth, but this is sort of like a treatment plan that I feel like is poorly founded. I've never understood how the concept of cutting the quills before you pulled them ever came into vogue, because I've pulled, I don't know, tens of thousands of them, professionally and as a amateurly as a hunter, but um, there's really, I don't that doesn't seem to make any difference at all, but yet it's still like a lot of people hold tight to the fact that you cut the shaft. I guess the idea is you break sort of the vacuum thing of it, but they're already hollow on the end and open, and then that somehow releases the pressure and the quill just falls out. And I can tell you that I've even tried that in practice when I had the time just to see, and it really makes no difference whatsoever. Really,
Mm-hmm.
what and why it's not a big deal if you want to do that on all those quills. You go right ahead. The problem is that that's just more time, and as I already mentioned, like, seems to be the more time you take in dealing with those quills, the more the inflammation builds around each one, and it just holds even tighter.
Yeah.
So I just pull them, and that would be the single biggest one I've heard of, and I've seen people try to like lubricate the dog, like rub it in oil to kind of
Yeah.
loosen those up, and
That
all
was the
that's
one I
really,
was about to say. Yeah.
yeah, I've heard that one too. And then I think what you're doing there is just reducing the friction on the quill itself. So now you're really going to struggle. You're more likely to break it. It's going to be harder to pull because you can't hold on to it, especially if you're out in the field, you don't have anything other than your oil, I guess, to put on. You don't have any pliers or hemostats or whatever to pull. That's just not going to benefit you. So those two, I
Yeah.
think, are pretty prevalent. Um, I don't meet too many people that think the porcupines shoot their quills. I mean, maybe they've seen their dog just like tussling with one, and blood and quills are flying everywhere, and it just seemed like they were throwing it, slinging them at him. But that's, other than that, I can't think of anything.
Yeah. And you bring up something good on that last comment, is the friction of pulling it, to where those barbs, you might think that just your handyman pliers, your Leatherman, is good enough to pull these quills. After being with a couple dogs in the field and using not only just pliers but hemostats and all that stuff, some of these quills suck. Like, they just
Yeah.
suck to get a hold on, especially pulling them straight out without breaking them off at the skin, which we've already talked about. Like, if you break them off at the skin, it's good luck getting a bite to get them out.
Yeah.
It's what not all tools are created equal in this regard. And so if you go out there and you think that you just have your Leatherman multi-tool on your hip, and that's going to be good enough for a bad porcupine incident, you're in for a long day, and you're going to get frustrated. And this is something that, again, just a month or two ago, when we had this latest incident, we had hemostats, me and my buddy Jacob. So we had we had two straight ones and two curved hemostats. and the straight ones were just about useless. It's like, especially his, they barely got bent in his vest or something, and they just sucked. They weren't grabbing squat.
Yeah.
The curved ones seemed to be a little bit better. You could get a better grip, but the pliers were next to useless. When we talk about, do you have any kind of light to shed on this? Anything tool wise recommendations? I did realize that while I have the hemostats and they are most certainly better than the pliers, uh, the cheap hemostats are not quality. Like, you do need to actually go get some decent quality heavy duty hemostats, especially back to my previous point about the straight ones that my buddy had that apparently bent in his pack just walking around hunting.
Yeah.
They were about useless. So outside of hemostats, pliers, what kind of stuff can you recommend to have in your pack in case you do come across an incident in the field that you need to just get in after it right then and there?
Yeah, I'm surprised to hear that you didn't have really good success with any of those tools, because I feel like those are the ones I think I'd recommend most people have. And
Yeah.
obviously, the quality of hemostats is gonna, like, run the gamut. You don't necessarily need like German-made surgical grade ones, but probably something that's got a little heft to it, and then one that won't necessarily bend in your pack over time is a good idea.
Yep.
I think that when I've had incidents, I've used just like sort of like a knockoff Leatherman, like a Coleman multi-tool or something like that, and it worked well enough. I like the hemostats personally, even though your experience hasn't been that positive with them, is that you can get them a little longer. So when you're dealing with, especially around the face, it's just nice to have a little a little bit of distance to get your hand away if there's like a
Right.
snap followed by the yank. And I mean, these things really stick in there, and you know this because you've done it, but I'm sure a lot of people listening have not. And when you pull, I mean, the skin's going to come with it for a period of time, and then especially around the upper lip, I mean, you're going to pull the lip
Yeah.
away. I think the work is always made easier by trying not to get too carried away. Like, start with one, maybe two if they're super close together at a time. But you want to just try to, be in line with the shaft, not come out from the side, and then just pull deliberately and straight out. And don't try to grab 10 at a time, because that's where you're going to get too much torque on the sides of them, and it's going to snap them off. But
Hmm.
man, I don't know if there's another really solid instrument besides those. Mine are the ones I use now were just kind of ones I had in my old anatomy kit from veterinary school. They're nothing super special. They may be nicer than what your friend had, but they're
Well,
probably 7 inches long,
yeah.
which I think is a pretty good distance for safety.
Well,
And they and
the
they lock. You can snap them. It has the
yeah.
sort of teeth in the middle and makes them keep a good bite
And,
on there.
and the hemostats that we had, like, those were the best things that we had on us to
Yeah.
work. But they were kind of entry level hemostats. So, like, I got the cheapest level of hemostats that I could afford that
Yeah.
had the locking capability, and those were the best ones that we could work. And then when we got to the vet, she had some of those heavier duty German made
Yeah.
hemostats, and she actually ended up giving one to my buddy when we left the vet, and it was just night and day. I mean, when we got in there, obviously she was able to sedate the dog, and so he was down, so like that helped. But just having the right tools for the right job, and just those heavier duty hemostats, it's like, all right, well, if you're going to be in porcupine country consistently, it might be worth spending 3 or 4 times more on a good set of hemostats than just the basic level that you can order on Amazon or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's a really useful device. I think people should, um it's nice to have like a little makeshift muzzle as well. If you're working around the mouth. Like I said, I tend to like exaggerate this point a lot, or maybe just overemphasize it. But so many people get bit by their dogs doing this kind of stuff.
Hmm.
So if you have a way that you can just, and I like those little just slip leads, like a D loop at the end, and you just feed it through and just kind of wrap it right around the snout, maybe once or twice to get a grip, but they can't open their mouths. Now, there may be some inside that's going to make them uncomfortable, but I think that's still like a necessary, that's just,
Step.
play dumb games, get dumb prizes, or whatever kind of
All
kind
right.
of consequence for the dog. Well, it's like, I told you not to do that, but that will protect you quite a bit. And then if you've got one of those dogs that's just like, it's not a matter of like if, but when that season, and they just seem to
Yeah.
get better at it every time. Like they just get more motivated to try again after every encounter. There's a few kind of like mouth speculums, like keeps the dog's mouths open. There's a guy who lives in Montana, Dan Healy, and he makes these little custom made gags, and it looks like a carabiner almost, or like a C clamp sort of thing. And then it's a lot like a C clamp, but instead of twisting in with metal, it's got these plastic things that go between the molders. So even if they don't want to open their mouth, you just kind of slowly crank and eventually it puts them open there. But if they bite down hard, they're biting down on softer plastic. And then that way they can't squeeze and you can get under the tongue. Now this takes a
Okay.
special kind of dog, right? And
Yeah.
of course, it snaps behind their head so they can't shake it out. It takes a dog that's going to not just completely go bananas when you start doing this stuff with
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, we used just the dowel setup.
Dowel
It's
works,
very
yeah.
yeah, it's very easy to make this. And for those that listen to this, maybe they're not familiar with it. Is literally just picture a wooden dowel, an inch long dowel, and or a big stick, if you will, and you just kind of put it in the back of their mouths as if it's a retrieving bumper, if you will, and then you can strap a paracord or rope, or I saw one guy did it with bungee cords. Like he took a wooden dowel and then screwed two eyelets on the end of it, and then he just did
Yeah.
a bungee cord right around the back, and then
Yeah.
there's your Home Depot DIY $4 jig, if you will, keeping your dog's mouth open. Because yeah, to your point, you keep reiterating it, but it is important. If your dog has a bunch of porcupine quills around the mouth, which generally speaking, that's where most of the dogs are going to encounter porcupine quills,
Yeah.
and they go and bite your fingers off, you're not much good to the
Yeah.
situation.
No.
You're not going to be able to help the dog. So it's self-preservation. It has to be the first step for you.
Yeah. Many times I've said, your dog is fine, but you need to go to urgent care right now. That kind of situation. I'm trying to help people avoid more of that.
Yeah, and it needs to be said, because if anybody's never been faced with their dog in a situation like that, you might be sitting here thinking like, oh, Fifi will never bite me. Well, you
Mhm.
put them in a stressful, high anxiety situation like that, to where they're encountered with pain. They don't know what's going on. They can't hear you from all the other hoopla going around. It's amazing how quick, Fifi, that would never bite anything, all of a sudden will just take your freaking hand off.
Oh, you're preaching to the choir right now. Let me tell you, this is like day in, day out as a veterinarian in the clinic, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and so let's say that you get the dog, because again, the two experiences that I've had have kind of resulted in the same outcome, to where you do the best you can, you go to the vet, you sedate them, you pull them, but then they're on watch for like weeks. This isn't just a couple day thing. Like both dogs kind of ended up in the worst case scenario in that regard, to where it's just like, my buddy Jacob was pulling quills for every day for 2+ weeks, and they just
Yeah.
keep coming. They just keep coming. And every time he would call the vet and ask, and it's kind of like, nobody could tell him exactly what to do. It's just kind of a wait and see type of thing. And you don't want to go cutting into a dog prematurely, because that can cause a whole mess of other issues. But is it really just wait and see? Is that all we can kind of do in that instance?
Yeah, I mean, I think how you sort of approach it is you can sort of choose to use like an antibiotic somewhat long term throughout this whole process. And then once they've done with that course of antibiotic, if things start cropping back up, then you still got a live one in there somewhere that you got to go fishing for, or sort of hope it kind of comes to the surface. But yeah, because it's sort of it's so many variables in how those things behave inside the dog. There's really not much you can do. It's like you can't really, maybe like a gifted ultrasonographer could find one under the skin. You're not going to see it on an X-ray. It's not like you can just go looking for them, really. So you just have to wait for them to show themselves. Or once an extended period of time has lapsed with nothing like that happening, then you're like, okay, we're probably good until next
Hmm.
time we find a porcupine.
Yeah. Because, I mean, I'm sure there are tests out there that can see them, but then you're talking about at what cost are you spending the money to go looking for something like, I mean, do they show up on any kind of scans? If money is no object here, what
Oh, I'm
kind of
sure you could
scans
do
would
it
show up?
like an MRI or something.
Yeah, that's
If
what
you
I
had,
was
I mean,
thinking.
but that would be, and even then, I'm not 100% sure how diagnostic that would be. But if you had one that was really moving somewhere, you could probably see it on that. Yeah, but that'd be
Yeah.
thousands of dollars and yeah, of
Yeah.
poorly spent money.
Yeah. Well, I mean, are there any instances? I mean, it kind of seems like it just all the way around, no matter which way you look at it or cut it, like it just sucks. If your dog gets into a porcupine, it is what it is. You got to pull them. It's going to be long. It's going to be tedious. It's going to suck. But like in your experience as a veterinarian, are there any like special cases that kind of come to mind that stand out to you to where like, man, that was a really kind of unique situation that just stands out in your brain when you kind of think back on any of your porcupine encounter experiences?
Well, I mean, I don't want to scare people about what my one or two, stories of hundreds that turned out okay. But yeah, there was one Brittany one time that the owner kind of did a, decent job of pulling them on their own. And then they kind of waited, which I told you was a bad idea. And then they started to fester. And I think that it was probably 6 months or a year with like multiple times this dog had to be sedated and go in there and like open up an abscess and find another one. And they just continued to produce quills over the course of about 12 months.
Mm,
So that, I mean, that was very expensive. I don't know that if the owner had really, like, I'm kind of blaming him for not jumping into action quickly, but I don't even know in that situation if had he acted immediately with perfect technique and gotten them all, that still, or most of them, it still had the same problem. It's hard to say, but for sure
yeah.
there was some, kind of like wringing his hands and not making a decisive decision that contributed that to some degree. But that's one that sticks with me because that dog was pretty miserable. And by the time, after like the fourth time, it shows up for yet another sedated procedure and a drain put in. It's pretty. It's tired of going to the vet. You know. So I felt kind of bad for that dog. But yeah, I mean, we talk about like, of course, draughts get made fun of, and short hairs are pretty bad too. The litter mate to my dog, the one that sniffed it this year, I mean, she's a fiend. Like she's done like five of them, and she like wants. So I
She's just
can't say it's
angry
just
at him.
yeah. The draughts just seem to have that little bloodlust that kind of helps. But the worst I've seen in practice have all been either pitties or mastiffs, and those
Really?
those are the dogs that like they hang on and they do not let go. I mean, like it seems like the porcupine's going to still be attached when they come to the clinic. Some, and that my best pictures, which I won't share because I breach of confidentiality, but my best pictures from the clinic are all in those breeds and not the sporting ones. So
Oh,
yeah, it
that's
could be worse, I
interesting.
guess, is my point.
Yeah, that's interesting. My buddy's draught, he went and got it, and it was a younger porcupine. It wasn't very old, so it was smaller. But I mean, he went in there, got it, dispatched it, brought it all the way back to hand, sat down, delivered it as if it was like a just a brilliant just retrieve like he's being
Yeah,
graded on it in a hunt test or
yeah,
something. And my buddy Jacob's like just standing there looking at him like I don't know how the heck to get this out of his mouth without sticking me. Like, I don't even know what to do. And I think he said that he
yeah.
ended up getting a stick and like prying it out or something. But
Oh
it's
man,
it's like I told him, I'm like, hey man, you got the draught right. That
right.
was step one in your adventure to the porcupine. But yeah, it is what it is. It's something that, it just sucks. It's an element that's out there, and it's something I try and tell everybody. Every now and then I do get a listener. It's like, well, what do we do about porcupines? I'm like, man, they're out there. Like you can't really avoid them. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. I'm not gonna let it keep me on the couch. It just kind of is what it is. But prevention, what you're talking about at the very start of this, if you have the opportunity to do an aversive training session with them, maybe stop your hunt for a minute and take the opportunity.
Yeah, and I think if you travel to these places and you don't know them super well when you hunt, it's hard. But if this is your home turf, you kind of get used to those little subtle differences between like an actual bird encounter, because there's usually some indication from the dog that this is going to happen early on, like a point or there's like a look, and then you're like, there's a cattail slew, and we haven't seen a pheasant in an hour, and this dog all of a sudden getting super interested. That's probably your cue that it's time to go over there and grab the collar before we get into that stuff. Or you just,
Yeah,
you kind of know the places they like to hang out after a while.
yeah.
But I've seen it, like I was in checker country, I don't know, in early or late October, and had a nice point right before dark in the sagebrush, and there was just a giant porcupine up in there. probably 500 yards from the nearest like cottonwood or deciduous tree, just in there on its. I look, there's a point, and I was able to like walk in there and grab the collar and just escort the dog away from the situation. So that, like you said, they can be anywhere, but I think, yeah, prevention. If you can learn the spots they like to hang out and avoid it, if you got a dog that's going to go after them, that's a good idea.
Yeah. Well, real quick, as we kind of wrap this up, we talked about the tools and everything. Is there anything in your vet supplies that you would say bring, maybe some kind of painkiller or something that maybe like lightly sedates them? I mean, you know, you guys are the gateway for the good stuff, I know, but is there something that we can carry in our packs that if we're in a pinch, maybe we're really far back and it's just really that bad of an incident, we need to clear the airway or something? Is there something that, you know, medicine wise we should have in our pack for something like that?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's not anything really good for that. That the dog's own adrenaline from the situation does not just kind of plow right
True.
through. And I
True.
think that
Yeah.
might help if you were to go home and try to get the last few stubborn ones when the dog's in a better state. I mean, Benadryl is pretty good at chilling dogs out, and you can do pretty high dose in that without any sort of ill effect. We use that a lot for stings and bites. Again, I'm sort of giving that as a canned answer. I don't truly believe it's going to be a miracle drug where they're just going to lay there and let you do kind of whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's where it gets expensive, is having to have a vet give you some of the powerful opiate and other sedatives to get them to hold still. It'd be nice if there was, and to be fair, that's what I carry in my kit. I've got 2 syringes, like ready to go if I ever need them. They're there. I've
Hmm.
never used them, but they're
So
there.
really, the correct answer is befriend a vet and just make sure that you're going hunting with a vet.
Yeah, or at least yeah, or have it all stored in your phone and where to go ahead of time too. Like it's something like people think because I am one that I instantly can, do all this stuff. Like I can't. I don't have a surgical suite here. I'm only as good as I don't have an X-ray. I'm not as good as my diagnostics. Otherwise, I'm just using
Yeah.
just my brain, which can get me in a jam and it got me out of a jam a few times. But
I'm
yeah,
sure
I
it's
mean,
worth the occasional hunting spot in return at the very least.
oh yeah, I'd be up for some trades for some for new ground to cover. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, Seth, if is there anything else that we should cover on this topic? I feel like, we didn't really appease anybody's concern here, but, at the end of the day, it kind of is what it is. There's no way of avoiding it. Porcupines suck, and they can easily ruin your day. And unfortunately, it's lingering effects from what I've kind of witnessed firsthand with my buddy's dogs and that Brittany you were talking about earlier. It kind of is what it is. You have to kind of take it in stride ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, you gave me the opportunity to talk about not cutting the quills or lathering your dog in butter or oil. So, like that, those said, I can't think of anything more I'm dying to add to the conversation.
Yeah, I think the oil. I think I actually saw somebody on social media. It was a year or two ago. I think I want to say it was olive oil that they fell for that, and they were just the dog just looked miserable. It was just a quill pen, and it looked horrible just because it was a wire hair, if I remember correctly, and somebody had just taken just olive oil all over it, and
Yeah,
it was the most sad looking creature on the face of the planet. It just
yeah.
don't fall for it. Well, Seth, I appreciate you taking the time and kind of going over some of this stuff. We'll have to circle back and have you on for something else. You'll have to let me know your response after you go researching some of that antibiotic claim on the quills or whatever
Sure.
they're saying that it is. But I appreciate you taking the time with us today.
Yeah, you bet, Nick. It was fun.
All right, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that conversation with Seth Bynum, aka the Bird Dog Vet on Instagram. This was presented by Standing Some Supply, DT Systems, Onyx Hunt, Upland Gun Company, and Final Rise. There's just inherent risks when you get into any type of hunting, but especially when you get into upland hunting and you bring in dogs. There's obviously a component or an element of concern and stuff that we can try and prevent or at least fix if something happens with our dogs. But there's more than just ourselves that we have to look for when we go out there chasing birds in foreign places and just kind of that whole sense of adventure. You have no idea what you're going to get into, whether that's porcupines or snakes or blue-green algae. You know, there are just inherent risks when you get into this. So when you talk about porcupines, hopefully, knock on wood, you never have an experience with it. But fortunately, as we talked about in this episode, I haven't had an experience with my own dogs, but buddies have come across it. And so if you go out and you do some hardcore hunting with some buddies, you know, eventually somebody in your group is going to come across a porcupine. Don't let it keep you from going out there. Don't let it keep you on the couch or in the house. It just is what it is. But that doesn't mean be reckless. You know, have your kit, have all the tools that you need, and everything that we discussed throughout the episode. But porcupines, it's kind of interesting. There's not a whole lot that you can naturally just know about porcupines just from seeing them, and so in researching and getting ready for this episode, I just looked up some random information about porcupines and tried learning about them. And so there are some interesting facts about them that I thought you guys might get a kick out of. There are actually around 25,000 barb quills covering most of their body. They are the only mammal outside of some bats to only have one offspring a year. It's called a porcupet. And quills harden about 1 hour after birth. Quills are hollow so that the porcupines can actually float and or swim. And a group of porcupines are not called a covey, they are actually called a prickle. And then one that we brought up on the episode, which I'm going to give you guys a response from Seth, is quills are coated with an antibiotic chemical which prevents the animal from getting infected if they happen to stick themselves. And again, this is what is interesting to me when you kind of Google random things that you may not be familiar with. While Seth and I were talking about this in this episode, I brought up the antibiotic when he was talking about concerns of infection and having to kind of do things quickly. And, he said that he was going to look it up after the episode, and he did. And he was extremely shocked to find out that based on my research, fortunately, I was correct in numerous sources saying that that there was antibiotic on the quills. And his response to that is the bacteria spectrum covered by the quill antibiotic would help in the event of prick, such as staph and streps, but not against a more malicious varieties that would thrive under the skin. By no means a green light to get an infected dog left to go untreated. So there you go. Yes, there are qualities which does help on the prevention of dogs getting infected and whatnot, but it's by no means, if it does enter the dog and go under the skin, as he was really kind of talking about in the episode, that's not a full blown. The bacteria, the spectrum that it's covered, it doesn't necessarily cover that. So still, act with a sense of urgency, act quickly, in the name of all emergencies and health scares or issues. The faster you can react correctly, the better that is, whether that's you or your dog in different situations. My buddy Jacob, which we talked about a few times throughout this episode, and his Draught Tig, at the time I'm recording this, it's kind of late mid-December, and he actually just texted me a couple days ago. They were out hunting, and he randomly got another porcupine quill to come out of his nose this time. And so this makes 2 months removed from that incident with the porcupine in Wisconsin, and he is still finding and pulling quills. So this can stretch on for a while. I mean, as we talked about, as Seth talked about in his experiences, it can be a long drawn out process. So hopefully, again, if you come across an experience with a porcupine, it's quick, it's uneventful, and you guys can just pull them out and just Charlie Mike can continue mission and move on down the road. But that's not always the case. And Tig is out hunting, everything seems to be fine, but it's just 2 months removed, still pulling quills. So take that for whatever it's worth. with all that being said, hopefully you enjoyed this. You learned something new. I at least found the topic interesting. If you enjoyed this episode, if you've enjoyed anything we've done in the past, if you've been following along on the new video podcast on YouTube and you want to continue supporting the show, then by all means, take a minute to type in patreon.com/Gundogger yourself. Your voluntary contributions go a really long way in supporting this podcast as well as helping us grow. And the Patreon members are directly, we couldn't do this show without them. I just recently placed an order for some new hats finally, so hopefully here in a few weeks those will be landing and I can kind of get that announcement out. But without Patreon, there's no way that I could do something like hats. But I've been getting a lot of questions about them, so hopefully everybody has been asking about them. They're on order now, so wait here in a few weeks and place that order when I announce it. But again, thanks for everybody for hitting download and play. Please share it with a friend, and we'll see you back next week. Thanks, guys.